This is Chapter 4, How to Pay Attention to What a Client Wants. So Chapter 4 is actually the start. Chapters 4 through 10 are going to be where we actually apply the skills of solution building. So this is the first step in the solution building process. So this is kind of like, we're going to talk a little bit about the introductory part of the session and starting to figure out why the client is there with you and what they want from being there with you. So as I mentioned, chapters 4 through 10, each chapter kind of talks a little bit about a skill that is used in the solution building interviewing process. So for the purposes of learning solution-focused work, we're going to assume that you are meeting a person who is coming to you or brought to you for help. Later, we will be modifying this for people who need help in situations tailored to maybe criminal justice, physician's assistant, teaching, art, therapy, any other discipline, because this can work with other disciplines as well. But first, let's learn how to do this with voluntary clients, and then we'll talk a little bit more about involuntary or mandated clients. Okay, so when we get started, we start with introductions or, chit chat, small talk, stuff like that. So what you want to do when you first meet your client is you want to first ask yourself, do you know anything about this person? So they're not in your office yet. Do you know anything about them? Do you have a referral form or, any type of information about the client? There may be an intake form, referral information, but it could be just a walk-in person or a crisis situation too. So first things first, do you know anything about the person? When you start your session, so your person is now in your office and you're talking with them. Names. First thing you want to do is introduce yourself and have the client introduce themselves. Figure out what they like to be called. Some people may have a formal name, such as maybe William, but they prefer to be called Bill. So you want to figure out how your client wants to be addressed. And maybe you want to let them know how you prefer to be referred to. Miss Stephanie or Miss Yordi, whatever your preference is, you want to let them know that up front. There might be different types of settings that you're working in. You could be in an office, you could be in your own home, you could be in their home, you could be, I guess when I say own home, I mean like if you're doing something virtual like this, let me clarify that, or you might be in their home as I mentioned. You could be a group home, group setting, detention facility, jail, different places like that, or a hospital. Then we have small talk after we do introductions. So one that I always used to use is when I worked in outpatient, I had an office. So clients would come to me in my office and I would say, oh, what's the weather like outside? Because I had an office without windows. Or how was your drive in today? Small talk. Small talk could be based off of whatever setting you're in or, whatever you feel most comfortable using. You may use the same one for every client, but small talk always kind of gets the client eased into the session without jumping into, why are you here today? Or, again, we don't use those why questions, but what brings you in today? All right, I gave you some examples of small talk. The next thing you want to do is explain how your meeting is going to work. You want to explain how long your meeting is going to be with that person and how the meeting is organized. An example might be you might talk for 30 or 40 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then come back and give them some feedback. Ask them if that is okay, that the session works like that. Let them be in charge or let them know what's going to happen. Another important thing that you want to let your clients know right away is confidentiality. You want to let them know that this is a safe place for them to talk and, also letting them know that you are a mandated reporter as well. So if they talk about harming themselves, harming somebody else, you would have to report that information. But aside from that, there is some level of confidentiality in what you're going to talk about. You also want to refer to wherever your working's policy on confidentiality to, so that you're familiar with that so that you can better, relate that to your client. Because there may be some situations where you do have to report some things to probation or a CYS worker or something of that sort. So make sure that you know what your policy is and the typical confidentiality standards so that you can relate that to your client. All right. The next thing you would want to do is ask them if they have any questions. Help to know if they understand what it is that's going on and understand that session with you. Then we get into that question, how can I help? How can you be of assistance to your client? This is where we've talked about before that problem description comes in. We're not going to focus on it, but we're going to kind of get the idea of why they are there with you. So you want to listen for the words that the person uses. Remember to take a not knowing stance or curiosity. And, once you're in the field for so long, you kind of get a feel for what works for you, and you'll get an idea of kind of, what you're going to be working with. So there's a little bit, I want to run through this briefly. Actually, I'm going to skip over that because we did do a lot of talk about the problem description, and I don't want to kind of keep instilling things into your head. But in your textbook, what I was going to reference was starting on page 62, the Peter and Christy dialogue. You can kind of take a look at that and kind of get an idea of, taking that not knowing stance and, that first, how can I help kind of question, if you want to, kind of re-go over that a little bit. So the next thing is now that we understand a little bit about why the person is there, we want to ask them, what have you tried? The authors say that so far that this has been useful, but if you find out that what they have tried hasn't worked, it might lead to increased understanding on their part and yours about maybe why it hasn't worked. So, we're asking them, what have you tried? So what do you think that message is sending to the person? It's letting them know that they have skills and that they are competent because they have tried something in the past. So it's empowering them. What do we learn from asking that question? Well, we learn what they know and what their strengths are, or what they know to have tried, I guess. Also, separate category, but if there are two or more problems, we want to ask the person, what is the most important problem that they want to work on first? So if they've given you, a couple different things, you might want to clarify, okay, well, you've mentioned that your son is skipping school, and you mentioned that your husband is not helping out around the house. Which one of those two do you think would be more beneficial for you to focus on? Which one would be more like the goal that you want to work towards, or that miracle that you want to work towards? So that is something too that you want to kind of do early on, is help them clarify what they want to work on first. So what about the person who loads the problem onto the problem? So they can feel overwhelmed, and so can you as the practitioner. How do you respond to that? You want to acknowledge how difficult things are to that person, and you want to ask which of the things they brought up is the most important to work on first. What is happening in your life that tells you it is important to work on this first? You can explore with that a little bit more too. Next step would be how to work with persons on what they want, the focus of this chapter. If the person easily talks about what they want to be different, that's great. And we go from there to build well-formed goals. Easy session, right? But what if they don't? What if they don't know what they want? Or they don't, know what they want to work on? What if they just want to talk about how bad it is, or they want to talk on that problem talk? What if they can't think of anything that they have tried to make things better, and they, again, return to that problem talk? Something that is kind of a good idea to keep in mind is you can let them explore the problem talk for a little bit. Obviously the goal is you want to guide them towards more solution-focused talk, but maybe they just need to get it out. Maybe they need to vent. A good frame of reference might be 5 to 10 minutes spent on problem talk, and then you want to jump into that solution focus. And that would be done in your first meeting. You don't want to do that every meeting, because then you're not really getting to the point. But that might be something that they need right away when they first come to see you. So let's look at what we do in 3 different types of relationships. So the first one being they want something and they see themselves as part of the solution. That is our first relationship with our client. What they want emerges pretty easily. So that would be your easy session. Both the person and you identify a problem and a solution, and that's something that you're going to work towards with that client. The person can see themselves as part of the solution, and they're willing to work towards that solution. They want to do something to better themselves. This would be a typical voluntary person that comes to your office or comes to your setting. This is someone that initiated treatment on their own. That would be an example of this person. An involuntary person could be this way too. They could see themselves as part of a solution. It's not always typical though, but it is possible. So the second type of person is the person who thinks that someone else in their life needs to change. The person identifies a problem and they find that a solution is important, but they don't see themselves as part of the solution, and they feel powerless to their problem, and they feel that others must change in order for that solution to happen. There is an example on page 67 in your textbook on the bottom about a kid who won't go to school. You could reference that if you want. This isn't rare for this to happen. A lot of times, a person may be willing to come to you and they may be willing to talk to you, but they're not willing to accept responsibility for their part in the problem or their part in the solution. So the third type of person or third type of relationship is I have no problem, or again, kind of part of that second problem is somebody else has the problem. So you're off to a rocky start with your client because they can't decide on a problem and they can't decide on a goal to work on. This is often those involuntary or mandated people that you might work with. They've been pressured or forced into services with you, and it's hard for them to kind of see why they have an issue or see that they even need to work on anything or even having a goal in mind. But you're going to do the same thing as you've done in the other two relationships. You're going to find out what that person wants. I believe it was in the previous lecture video in chapter 3, or it may have been in chapter 2, but we talked about there's always something to want out of the relationship. So even if that person is mandated or involuntary, they still want to maybe get those people out of their lives. So there's always something to want. You just have to figure it out with the person. I'm just going to mention this briefly because there is a discussion board question on it, and I'm going to have you kind of explore it more there, is the case of Beth, 15-year-old that burned all of her bridges. She's heading for long-term residential treatment, depressed, running away, threats of suicide. She's uncooperative, charged her father with child abuse. He was arrested and released on bond. She's in the ER. Parents are requesting placement out of the home. So case of Beth, we're going to talk a little bit about that in your discussion board. So I just wanted to mention it here as well. Definitely someone we want to explore a little bit more. She feels that everyone is against her, and your discussion board questions are going to talk about, what was the social worker trying to accomplish with her? What was Beth's response? What assumptions is the social worker making, and are they useful? So refer to your discussion board to explore that a little bit more and start applying this skill of what does this client want? What does Beth want? Another suggestion that was made by the authors of a way to work with resistant clients is to pay attention how the client got to you. So assume that person's perceptions for a moment, both about their self and the situation, make sense within their time or their reference. So how do we do that? What do? We ask questions about the perceptions that don't make sense to us. So assuming that the person is competent, even when they are talking nonsense or talking about things that, aren't really relevant. But we hold the person accountable for their own perceptions. If the person tells you that they get along with people better when they are high, we explore, well, what is happening that tells you get along with people better when you're high? How does being high help you? So we mentioned this before when we talk about manipulative clients, or clients that, maybe are, seeking to harm somebody else. Well, we still want to explore that with the person, but by exploring it, we're not necessarily enabling the behavior or encouraging the behavior, but we need to figure out why are they having these thoughts, or why are they thinking that way, why they are having this perception. So, when you're working with resistant clients, why is the person resistant with you? You want to figure out what their frame of reference is and, not combat with them as far as, well, you need to be here. Okay, well, yes, that's obvious, but we want to explore, okay, so why do you think you don't need to be here? What tells you that you don't need to be here? Why, what makes you think that the person, your probation officer, is sending you here? Stuff like that. That's what you want to explore. So if they are involuntary, several things are generally true about the involuntary population. There are multiple persons involved with their case. So it might be a school, a parent, children's bureau, probation, court, judge, whatever. The second thing is we usually know more about what the other person wants for them than what the primary person wants. So we know more about what the court or referral source wants versus what the person actually sitting in your chair wants. Third, the person often sees the situation very differently than the other people involved in the situation. 4, they often feel that they haven't been given a choice about the goal since it is mandated by whoever mandated it. 5, they often see the goal as a punishment, and the punishment may not be fair to them or not warranted. And, so often they're out to get me. You'll hear that a lot. 6, and they expect the professional to listen more carefully to more powerful persons than to them. They are expecting you not to listen to them. They think that you're not there for them. They think that you're there for the other people because the other people are the ones that referred them to you. 7, the natural response to being forced is resistance. Regaining control, by being out to get the controllers. Loss of dignity, and you're focusing on making the authority figures look undignified or you want to feel their pain. If people feel oppressed, the natural result is resistance. You don't want to create that resistance with your client when you're working with them. About the case with Beth, real quickly, I want to mention, how did Sue approach Beth? So she acknowledged her frustration. She asked her, how do you want your life to be different? If you could have your way, what would be different about it? Why is what you want so important to you? Do you think that they know how important it is to you? Do you think they know that you love them? What would it take? What has to happen first before you can go home? Stuff like that. So that is how Sue approached Beth, who was giving some of that resistance. So Sue didn't really give any suggestions or advice. Like, she wasn't being confrontational with Beth. The closest she gets to voicing an opinion is telling Beth that she's not sure the parents knows that she loves them. So she stays in that not knowing stance when she's working with her. It seems that persons are usually willing to work for what they want to have happen. So, that's kind of the approach that Sue handled the debate about Beth's father's abuse. All right. When the person drifts towards problem talk, you just want to guide them back to solution talk. We've mentioned that before. Some tips on how to make the relationship with an involuntary or mandatory person work is assume they have a good reason for whatever they are there for. Again, work from the person's perspective and ask what the person wants and accept it or ask about it. Try to understand it and listen. Listen. What if the person wants what is not good for them? Ask what is happening in their life that tells them that is what they want. Ask them why they think that is good for them. Make them think about it. We've talked about this with the relationship questions. If I were to ask your kid's wife boss about continuing to use drugs is good for you, what do you think they would say? Stuff like that. If that doesn't work in cases of abuse or maybe suicide, then you might have to violate that person's self-determination, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in chapter 10. Again, we've mentioned, what if the person doesn't want anything? We'll manage that through feedback too, which is chapter 7, but we'll work through that. The focus is on being useful and helpful to the person, not focusing on their defenses. So you want to do whatever you can to try to be as helpful as you can to that person, even if they seem like they are being resistant or maybe in denial about the reasons why they're there. End goal is to figure out what they want and help them work towards that goal. So even if they come in with not wanting something, by the end of that session, you're going to have figured out something that they want, even if it's not what you think that they should want from that situation. Any type of want is a good goal, and that will kind of help you build to the next step. So that is it for this chapter lecture video, and we will continue on with the next step in chapter 5. Thanks.